Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here, and my friend today is from Ireland, and Godfrey. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Irina. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad you agreed to this interview. So we've met through Knitters Gonna Knit group. We actually, it's a funny story because I was friends with Orla for like
hmm
a while
Yeah, yeah.
before from another group, and then somehow like I started talking to you and I realized that you were from Ireland, and I asked, well, do you know Orla? And then only to figure out that you guys went to elementary school together,
That's
right?
right.
So it's
I
like a
know.
small world, basically.
Yeah. You realize very quickly sometimes, especially in a world like knitting or in any kind of a group where you have things in common that you cross-reference people and you realize that there are people in there that you've known in other contexts.
Right.
And you and I and Orla. And I think I was following you on Instagram for a while, again through Orla. She connected me with you, and of course, that then when Knitters Gonna Knit opened, Orla tagged me, and then it's just funny. And then that's how I met David, of course,
Right.
as well.
So you mentioned to me that you grew up in the very crafty family, that your
Yeah.
mom was always knitting. Do you remember like how you learned to knit, or is it something that like almost like how you learned to walk kind of memory?
Yes, it really is almost like learning to walk. I don't remember a time when I didn't know how to knit. I really don't. I know my mother taught me how to knit, and I remember her. I remember her casting on for me initially, and then I was knitting for my dolls. I was knitting small things for my dolls, and I remember her helping me to cast them off. So she would teach me the skills a little at a time. She didn't try to teach me everything at once. And I think part of it was because she didn't have time. I've got two sisters, and at the time, we were all very close in age. So she was probably busy with, one of my sisters. But I do remember always the sense of achievement of finishing something and putting it on my doll and going around showing it to everybody. So I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't knit and when there wasn't knitting around the house. My mother was always knitting for us. She knit all of our sweaters, all of our jumpers. She knit all of our socks. And she knit us things for every single Christmas, for Easter, for any special. She also made all our clothes. We weren't very well off. And so that was a time when it was less expensive to knit or make your own clothes. There was no such thing as fast fashion back then,
Right.
especially in Ireland. So that's what she would do for special occasions when we needed something new. She would make it for us, or she would knit. My sisters and I talk about this all of the time, and my nieces and my kids like to hear about it, the things that my mother knit for us. And we were all so close in age that people used to think we were triplets because
Right.
everything was the same, because it was cheaper to buy a lot of the same thing rather than buying things that were different.
Well, let
So
me ask you this question. So when I was growing up, or like rather when my mom was growing up, my
mhm,
grandmother was extremely crafty. So she was a seamstress in town. She was a knitter. She was crocheter. She did like bobbin lace. Like she knew it all. She was like very crafty. And she taught all her children how to do that. So they, like my mother knew how to sew, how to knit, how to crochet. But it was the same thing when it was done out of necessity. Basically it was done because it was cheaper to make than to buy, and they
mhm.
had also 3 kids and it was tight budget. So for my mom growing up, she saw all crafts as sign of poverty. And so as soon as she was able to get a job and to start making money, she wanted nothing to do with handcrafts. did you ever feel like the sense of resentment? Did you ever walk away from handcrafts? Did you ever see that as something associated with poverty in your mind? Or was it so part of you that you never thought of it that way?
I never thought of it that way. It's so much a part of me, and always, even as a teenager and in my early 20s, I made all my own clothes, and I did it by choice. And I would go and I would look for patterns that were in fashion. I turned more to dressmaking in those years than I did to knitting. If I knit, in fact, actually, that's not true. I used to knit leg warmers in the 80s for myself, in the 80s and 90s. I would knit these huge, sloppy colorwork sweaters, and I would knit leg warmers to match and headbands to match. And I made my own clothes. I used to make these like elaborate, suits and like jackets and trousers to match. And yeah, no, I always saw it as something that I felt proud to be able to do, that my mother had taught me to do. My sister's the same. We all made our own clothes, I suppose, until a time when time, I had time constraint. And this was through college as well, when it was still less expensive. And if I wanted, the trendy clothes, I had to make them myself. I had fewer clothes, so I would make them myself. And also, I was also the kind of person who wanted to kind of stand out in a crowd a little bit. Not that I was, I have kind of this mixed personality where I'm a little bit of an introvert. I'm, an introvert, but I also like to be a little bit different. I like to think outside the box. I like to be outside the box. So I found the only way to look a little bit different, to have clothes that were a little bit different, was to make my own.
Right. Well, so when we talked, you sort of, like, when I first approached you about being on my channel, you said, well, I don't have any business. I'm not like a designer. I'm just a crafter, right? But like, in a sense, you are a designer, and it's not a business, but like, you're very creative. And like, I mean, the way I see it, you have a wonderful story, right? Do you ever consider like having a business, turning it into a business? Because like, if you're making your own clothes and you're making your own choices as to what you're gonna need and how you're gonna make it, it's sort of, you are a designer, just like taking one extra step of putting the pattern together, right?
It's funny because I am asked all the time when I've been overseas, and actually particularly when I was in Serbia, and I was in a very public position, and using my position to advocate for, women like me, or people that I saw like me, who crafted and wanted to be entrepreneurs and wanted to use their crafts to earn a living. And I would be asked all the time, especially when I spoke about, my aran knitting, in the traditional sense, what would it cost? Would you not, sell this? What would it cost me if I wanted to buy this from you? And when I would start thinking about what I would have to charge people if I wanted, it would just, I would freeze up. I would get paralyzed. I said, no, I can't ask somebody for what it is worth. And then if I was to do this, if I was to turn my crafts into something that I would have to sell, I would be afraid that it would take the joy out of it for me. That's one aspect of it.
Right.
While I'm knitting and crafting in order to give things to people as gifts, it gives me pleasure and it gives me joy. The other aspect of it would be that I would fear that if I was to turn it into a business, I would have to choose one or maybe two. And I'm not sure that I could do that either. I love to do too many things. And, one thing that my perspective on crafting is that for me, it brings people together. It's the community aspect of it. And if I was to ever, step into a business or, run a business or have a business that was craft oriented, that would be where I would go with it. I would have a place where people could come together, maybe a shop, a store, a workshop,
Nice.
something like that.
Well, let's talk about your experience in Serbia.
Mm-hmm.
So you came there. Did you immediately have that vision that you want to support local crafters? So how did that idea came to be?
Well, I didn't even know that it existed when I first got there. So when I first got there, it was my first, experience. It was my husband's first ambassadorial position, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. We arrived at the end of October, so almost into November, and I was just finding my feet. And then what happened was we put up our Christmas tree in the house, our official Christmas tree, and it was the usual kind of Christmas tree that you would see in any American home. It was full of glittery bows and baubles and stars and all this. And I was looking at it and I was thinking to myself, there has to be something else here. There have to be some traditional kind of ornaments here in Serbia. I have to be able to find something that is more traditional that we can put on our official tree that reflect the local, the local people, the local craft. And I had no idea what there was. Even downtown in the streets, I hadn't seen anything that felt authentic to me. Like I had seen in Russia, for example. Right. You would see them all over the place. So we had an event at the house to open the art that we had. We had an exhibit of art in our house, and somebody introduced me to Violetta, who was, and they introduced her to me as the director of a nonprofit organization, who all I knew about her in that moment was that she supported local women who did local handicrafts, and that they knew what I was looking for. They had heard, and honestly, what happens is if either an ambassador or an ambassador's wife say they're looking for something, everybody starts looking for it. So they had heard that I was looking for some kind of Christmas tree ornament that was locally produced, that would reflect local crafts, and they thought maybe she might have what I was looking for. So she pulled up on her phone, we were introduced, and she pulled up on her phone these photographs that just blew my mind of, and I actually have some here of these. See them?
So beautiful.
Aren't they? And, they were just, look at this one, right? And I said, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Do you have more of these? Do you have other examples of this? So, and that was just the start. You asked how I found, this is how I found Etnomreža, which is the name of the organization. And basically it just went from there. I arranged a meeting with her. She did a presentation, and it was like, I sat there listening to her, and she did a PowerPoint presentation about so this is just one example, the felting, weaving, knitting, crochet, and how their organization, their objective was manyfold, and one of them was to revive the traditional crafts of Serbia, because as you're aware, it used to be Yugoslavia, and then after the breakdown of communism, it became 6 independent countries, and that as part of Serbia's national identity, they were trying to revive the national the handicrafts and train women to produce them in a skilled way. And they were getting support from our embassy, which is why she was at the event at our house, and other embassies as well. And So then it just we this very close working relationship and friendship developed between the two of us, and I started, visiting, some of the groups, and I participated in 2 weaving colonies and an embroidery colony, and it just my work. What happened was I found my thing. I found my work as an ambassador's wife. I found my work, and it just gave me a focus. It, put my feet on the ground, and it got me out into the country. I was able to explore Serbia in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Right. I find this so interesting because, like, you saying you found your work, but it's almost like the work found you. And
Yes.
it's just because you were like, you
Mhm.
had that passion for knitting and the fiber arts, right?
Yes.
That you got exposed to that side of Serbia. Like if you were anything else, like if you had
No, it would not.
woodworking hobby or something,
No, you're absolutely right in saying that the work found me, because, it was really, and because I had already the passion for, the knitting that I already, that's been there all my life, and I understood the value of the work.
Right.
And so I was able to speak even publicly, and I did TV interviews, and I wrote articles, and I did magazine interviews. And what happened also was, the people that I met, even the press that I met, they were just like saying, they were very puzzled by it at first. Like, why are you so interested? Like, these are just, so I was able to tell them why. This is, I grew up with it. But then the other side of it was the people that I met, the women and there weren't only just women. There were in some of the colonies, there were young men, and also some older skilled men, and people like David,
Right.
who were also interested. There's an absolutely fabulous fashion designer in some tiny little village that you would never have known about. I'd never have met him except through this. But they were like my sisters. It was like meeting my sisters, my mom, my grandmother. They were kind of my people, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And even though I didn't speak the language very well, we were still able to communicate on a level that, I didn't need fluent Serbian.
Right. Well, like, so you mentioned that like it felt like home, it felt like your family. And I find like knitting and fiber arts in general, it's sort of like that international language that you don't need to understand every word. You just like sort of connected on this different level, right? But so the importance of fiber arts in Serbia for you as an Irish and for you as an American, why did you felt like it was so important? Because like if I'm like it's like you are there for temporary period of time, right? You are there for short period of time. Why did you feel like it was important that the embassies, and not only American embassy, I know there's like Canadian embassy that also like very active, and other embassies, like why did you feel like it was the job of those embassies to support the local craft, to help those women, to help those people revive it?
One of the reasons for me, I think, is because the organization had been trying to engage the local government for so long, and they had only been listening in a half-hearted manner. And because the local government changes so often, and the new people keep coming through all the time, this was a problem for them. And so I felt that if I could use my voice and, to an extent, my position to make them aware that this is an important part of their culture, not just for themselves, not just for their people, but for the outside world. that every single country that I'd lived in, every single country in the world considers their national handicrafts, and in this case, fiber arts, to be an important part of who they are.
Right.
It's part of their heart and their, so I use these words all the time. It's part of the heart and soul of the country, that, if they could recognize this by looking at the products and looking at the level of skill that these women have, and that it can be, what you have to do is translate it into words that, something that they can really understand and use, and give it economic value.
Right.
And so the time that I was there, that was what sort of our mission, the work that I did with the organization, this was what our mission was. Our main mission was to get a gallery in Belgrade for them to use as a workshop, and a place to sell the products from all over the country, and a place to display the beautiful work that they produced in all of their various fiber arts.
And I met David, right? So I met him a couple years ago, and we became fast friends basically. And I always call him Modern Da Vinci, because he's just so talented in so many areas, and I feel like he is very knowledgeable in so many areas. He knows like history of costume and historical costume, and like he can weave, he can crochet, he can knit, he can design, like superbly talented guy.
Mm-hmm.
His biggest frustration living in Serbia is inability to sell his stuff internationally. So Serbia stopped allowing Etsy, or Etsy stopped allowing Serbian nationals to use it. So Etsy is not a possibility. It's very hard and very expensive for them to have a website.
Yes.
So he cannot have his own website. So when he tries to sell his handicraft, or like his weaving, like he has these pillows that they weaved, or some stuff that he knitted. When he tries to sell it, the only way for him to sell it is to show, like in the group, like Knitters Gonna Knit, this is what I have. If you're interested, please contact me directly. But then people feel like it's sketchy because they don't, it's somebody who doesn't have the website. And I'm sure if David, with all his brilliance, dealing with these issues, some lady from like a remote village would have even harder time, because
this is very true.
Right. So
this is very true.
Like, how can people, and I'm hoping that our interview sort of brings a little bit attention to crafts like that, because Serbia is not the only country that's dealing with it, but this is just an example because you live there, you work there, you try to help. And I have a friend, our mutual friend, who lives there, right? So as an example, like, how can people in general, people, in the world, can help revive those crafts, can help support those artists?
So, I do, honestly, I get asked this all the time in Serbia. Violetta and I talk about this always, all the time. And, in Serbia, actually in Serbia, I do think, specifically in Serbia, I do think things are improving a little bit. For example, I think now it is possible to use Etsy, although it's expensive. That's the problem. It makes, and I know it's the same the world over. Etsy makes things very expensive. Personally, I'm not crazy about Etsy. I think it's really hard as a small business person to work on Etsy. But I do think, so my weaving teacher, Maria, who also, met with David, she does have a website, and sells within Serbia. But again, the problem with international is the costs of shipping, and issues with customs. Right. And I think, international, customs across the world are affected by everything now. I would say that the way we support each other is, I mean, there has to be a certain level of trust. I really do think there has to be a certain level of trust. And I think by, you know, messaging, if you want, like if we see, for example, I think it's great. One of the things that I love, there are many things I love about this group, about Knitters Gonna Knit, that, you know, I have left other knitting groups for, you know, they're all for other reasons. And then I come and this Knitters Gonna Knit group has all of the aspects that I feel should be allowed within a knitters group. One of them being that you should be allowed to advertise if you're knitting, if you're selling something, is that we have to trust each other. There has to be a certain level of trust. And then if we're in this group, and I think we all trust you and we trust David, that if there's a problem, and there have been problems, that you deal with it straight away. And I don't believe that anybody on here is going to do anything dishonest, you know.
Right.
I myself personally, I don't know. I just think the world is a really hard place right now, and it's really hard for us to support each other, and that the more we support each other on this group, I think the better, you know.
And I also feel like it's funny because there was like when you said that like you felt right at home in Serbia and you felt like it's your people and the story connects with your upbringing and your childhood, right? I have the same connection, even though I never have been there. I have the same connection to Shetland somehow. Like I always feel like if I were there, those would be my people, and this my story relates, and my upbringing, my childhood somehow like connects with Shetland. And reading the article that Shetland lace is one of the fiber arts that's almost obsolete, like that becomes extinct, really hurts me. Like, and I feel like I'm trying to do whatever I can do to just spread the word about the existence of Shetland lace, right? About just because like so many people never heard of it, don't know about it. But then if I show my shawl that I knitted, right? It sparks interest, and then maybe somebody else will knit it and somebody else will knit it, or people will buy from Shetlanders and will keep that art alive, right? And to me, Serbian ethnic like fiber arts is the same exact thing, or any other country for this matter. Like if we keep those skills alive, if we keep those artisans who can teach like the new generation, right? I feel like we're all making the world more beautiful and better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is one of the things that really, really brought me in and really kept me there about Ethnomraja, is that another part of their mission is the passing on of the skills. And I'm sure you saw the very first workshop that David went to was in Stapar, and the motive that they weave, because all of the different regions have a different motive for weaving, and the motive that they were weaving up there is the Stapar rose. I went to that workshop myself the year before, and when the organization revived this weaving in this region, there was only one person who knew how to weave the rose, and it almost had completely died out because there was only one person left, and she was, I don't know, in her 90s when they found her, and she taught them, you know. And that was the jacket that David then designed, you know, for the president's wife. And so you see, all of those, I mean, you're right, these connections need to be made, and they need to be written about, and they need to be publicized, and they need to be part of they need to be part of the written history as well, the modern history of the art of a country, the history of a country. And I feel in today's world, there's so much emphasis on science and being strong, kids being strong in science and going up into space and And I'm not saying that these things aren't important. They are, obviously. But I feel that we also need to put our eyes back on earth, you know, and take care of what's around us here,
Right.
because there are so few people who are going to be able to go to space, you know, in our children and grandchildren's lifetimes, that we have to take care of what's here. Somebody made a comment to me the other day that I thought was very observant. It was from a couple of Americans who have moved here because one of them is doing a master's in art at one of the local local colleges, art colleges here. And they said that here, I mean, this part of Ireland is quite remote. I mean, it's not in the middle of nowhere, but it is fairly remote. And that there's a lot of, there's a lot of manual, not manual work, but it's a lot of, like, not everything is automated. Like what she was saying was, you know, she drives a manual car. You know, she doesn't have a dryer, so she has to hang her washing out to dry and then run out and get it when it starts to rain, and then, you know, somehow hang it around the house, you know, those kind of things. And I feel like there's a lot of that lost in the world today. And I think those of us, and, you know, we are in our, you know, tens and hundreds of thousands around the world who work with our hands. We have to sustain that. And it's very important that we pass on not just the skills and not just as hobbies, but the value of working with your hands.
Well, you know what's interesting? I was interviewing yesterday, actually, Wim van der Reking. So he is from Belgium, Mr. Needbear on Instagram. And he's a teacher in elementary school there.
Mm-hmm.
And he said
that's also my profession, by the way. I'm in elementary school by profession.
Right. So he said that interesting thing that, like, the reason he started to knit was because he noticed that his students had really poor fine motor skills, because nowadays nobody does crafts anymore.
Nobody handwrites anything.
Right. So he said that, like, he noticed that the kids, like, didn't do craft, didn't glue, didn't cut, had hard time writing, hard time holding the pen. So he was trying to think of, like, what fun activity he can do with them. And he stumbled on the yarn store, and he came in and he saw that they were crocheting. So he first learned how to crochet, and then he got so addicted to that, and then he got into knitting, and now he's an author of 3 different books. So, but it's interesting that, like, it's those skills that get lost. It's like they're detrimental to so many other things, you know.
Yep.
It's like we think of them as like, oh, we don't need that anymore, but you do actually. It's like it's still helpful in other areas as well.
It's hand-eye coordination. It's left side, right side of the brain. It's on. It really is. It's like, but it's also keeping your. I mean, I have arthritis in my hands. And I honestly feel that constantly doing things with my hands helps that, because my joints, you know, it keeps them fluid, it keeps them moving. You know, I mean, I did all of those things in school here in Ireland when I was growing up, in elementary school, in primary school. I had teachers who let me knit and crochet. They encouraged. I mean, it was part of school. We had to learn to knit and sew. You know, I was very lucky. I had this one teacher in 5th and 6th class who encouraged us to knit and sew in class. While she was teaching geography or history, she would let us knit away in class, and then would show off our work to the rest of the. I mean, it was, you know, it was amazing that I grew up with that nowadays, and now I just feel like those skills are being lost. And it's the skills that are being lost, not the fact that people are knitting or sewing or whatever. I mean, you call up for a plumber these days, I can't get one for love nor money, you know, or they're all booked up for the next 2 months and you have to wait. So,
well, I had a conversation about it with a friend of mine who is a principal in Boston public school, actually, and we had that discussion. So he was saying that, like, if money were not an object, like he would put state-of-the-art library into school. And I said, listen, like when I was growing up, I grew up in like rural Siberia. There was, the next town was 2 hours away. There was like nothing but forest basically, and the 15,000 people who were building a hydraulic dam there. Um, and we had in school, every single person was supposed to get a trade. Like by the end of the school, the girls knew how to paint and plaster walls, and the boys knew how to do roofing and woodworking. So that was like part of the school curriculum. It wasn't negotiable. Everybody had to get
Yeah.
a trade license. So by the time we graduated, probably like 30%, 25% went to college, and the rest of the people had a job in hand. So whereas the
Different.
school that my kids go to, 98% go to college. And I was like, as much as I'm all for the education, I feel like not everybody necessarily needs a college education,
Yeah.
but everybody needs some sort of practical skills. And the
Yeah.
fact that the schools nowadays don't have the vocational program is not the greatest decision.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I think there are people, departments of education, I don't know what you call them, are starting to realize that and trying to encourage students now, or help them to see that those options are available to them, that they can go to trade school, or that they can apprentice, or they're offering 2-year programs, but not enough children are taking them up. And I think sometimes, I blame, oh gosh, it's not blame, it's just that maybe it's our generation don't see that, enough of our generation don't see that as a quote unquote good enough option for their children.
I think it's that, but I think it's also like the vanity of having
Yes,
a
a
degree,
4-year university degree. Yeah.
right? Because it's like it became not about knowledge, but about having the certificate, sort of.
Yeah.
And I find, and it's funny because like when I talk to David, like this is a prime example of a person who prefers knowledge over the formal education, because he studies what interests him, but in such depth, right, that he probably could have a PhD in historical
How many
costume.
times over? I know.
Right.
No, I agree. Yeah. Yes, indeed. I mean, how many languages does he speak?
Right. But
You know.
also like another thing I find about like the local fiber arts, that you go, like you're an Irish woman who grew up in like surrounded by local crafts, right? Local style. But then you go to Serbia and you're exposed to stuff you've never seen before, you didn't even know exist. And suddenly you're learning how to weave that rose. And so it's like, I feel like the more we know about different crafts in different countries, it enriches us as fiber artists. It gives us inspiration to try something else, you know?
Yes. Also, and this is something that I have learned as I have moved around the world, is that we also cannot jealously guard our secrets, because I have found over the years sometimes, and this is where sometimes I object to having things like guilds, having a knitting guild, a weaving guild, a felting guild, because they become a little too purist, and exclusive, as in excluding,
Right.
of people who haven't learned and trained in what they consider to be the right way. So, and a couple of sort of examples I would give is, first of all, I'm an Aran. Aran knitting is my passion. I love Aran knitting. I love it. That is what my mother, specialized in. And so she has passed on her love of that to me. And I have learned, believe it or not, from my house. I can see the Aran Islands right over there. And I've been to the Aran Islands many times. And I've got wool, like this is wool here. like Aran Islands wool, and you can get in all sorts of colors now. And so I love Aran knitting and all of the different stitches, and I could talk about the stitches, the patterns and what they mean and where they come from. And there's all sorts of lore and everything connected to the Aran stitches. However, you know, I look at David's knitting and his design. For example, you know, I know we're talking about David a lot, but we both know him very well, and you know, and he's a connection, but also because he is a clear example of how knowledgeable he is and how much he has delved into fiber arts. But his patterns, like for example, his Eru shawl and his Eru knitting, his Eru headband, you know, they have Celtic patterns on them.
Right.
And they are Aran patterns. In Serbia, I have seen Celtic knotwork on and Celtic crosses on the khachkars in Armenia. I've seen them in Italy. I've seen them in Georgia, right? So, you know, who's to say that Aran knitting belongs only in Ireland? Really? Because you know, I used to say, oh yeah, I'm an Aran knitter. Arans are like Irish fishermen sweaters. They are exclusively Irish. And, you know, when Americans come here, they all want the Irish sweaters. And I was having a conversation online with somebody the other day who, you know, I was looking at somebody who, a friend of mine whose son was wearing an Aran sweater, and I was saying, oh, I'd love to know where he got his sweater. Somebody else popped in and said, oh, I heard this story about Aran sweaters. And I said, yes, you know, I said, I'm from Ireland. And I said, that is an old story. I said, but nowadays they create Aran sweaters that have family names on them. Now that is a new concept for Aran sweaters. There was a time, I admit, when I would have dismissed that and said, you know, they're fake Aran sweaters. That's fake, you know, you can't. But in actual fact, why not? When I knit an Aran sweater now, I like to involve, if I'm knitting it for somebody, I like to involve them in the creative process. I have them sit with me. I show them all of the stitches. I show them all of the patterns, and I say, which ones do you like? Do you like this one? This is what it means. Or do you like this one? This is what it means. Or if I'm knitting for somebody and as a surprise, I pick stitches that I think fit them. So, you know, I no longer feel that you have to, you know, keep Aran knitting only. It's only Irish. It's not only Irish.
No, I so passionately agree with you on that, because at some point of my life, I decided to learn Orenburg lace just because I was like, I'm Russian, I should know, like I'm knitting only Shetland lace, I should learn Orenburg lace as well. So I found like a few patterns and I was trying to figure it out. And if you need Shetland lace and then you try to knit Orenburg lace is much simpler. However, it's not very intuitive. The charts are read completely different. The charts are written completely different. So it wasn't easy for me. So I was trying to figure out, like, I understood that it's simpler because like all the directions is like one direction for all the decreases. So it's like, in theory, it's easier, but like I couldn't get it, right? So I was trying to, and I speak fluent Russian. So I was trying to talk to the Russian people who like do Orenburg lace, trying to figure out where I'm going wrong, what I'm doing wrong. And the most common thing I've heard, if you don't get it, it's not for you. And eventually, Vicky Shepherd was the one who I met in Fine Shetland Lace group. She was the one who explained Orenburg lace to me. So here we go, full circle, right? Like I'm talking to a person who never been to Orenburg, never stepped her foot in Russia, and she was the one who taught me Russian lace. And I feel like this is what needs to be done. Like people need to stop thinking about like if you take Shetland, they're out of Shetland, it's not a Shetland lace any longer. And just educate others and share their knowledge and share their experience, you know?
Right. Because if you say that it only belongs here, it will die eventually.
It's the fastest way to kill it. It's
because there won't be enough people
Right.
I mean, I look around in Ireland, and I now go to, there's a place not too far from here called the Irish Fibercrafts Center, and it's fabulous. I go there, and it's where I do where I learn. I've been doing needle felting and wet felting, and making things there. But they spin and they dye, and none of them knit. They don't knit. They don't know. And she's been asked. She said to me, "Well, in the new year, I want you to come and give Aaron knitting lessons." And of course I will. But but there's nobody knitting there. And I go to the Aran Islands, and they have all these, sweaters, and it's like a little cottage industry. But not all of their knitters are Irish, because they don't have enough. They could never keep up the supply.
Right.
If they did. And it is the fastest way to kill something. The other example I was thinking of is I went to an embroidery colony with Ethnomregia, in I think it was like in April, I think last year, April or May. And while I was there, it was in a part of Serbia that's also that in Vojvodina, where there are, and this goes back to Yugoslav time, there are 28 ethnic groups living in this particular region, and one of them has a Hungarian background. And they were talking about some of the patterns that we were embroidering. I don't have mine here, it's over there somewhere, but they were talking about the patterns, and they were talking about where they came from. And there was this argument going on about, no, it originated here, no, it originated here. And then somebody was talking about, well, it started back here, and it came here, and it came here. And my thought was, does it really matter? In fact, what you're saying is, you're tracing the history. And one of the ladies really wanted to say, no, this belongs here, and it came here, and this is our pattern. This is our pattern, like being so possessive about it. And what the other person was trying to say was, well, the people who live here now originally came from here and moved here, and then the pattern was like this, and then it became expanded, and they added to it, and then they changed the coloring, and they were showing the costumes. But that's exactly what happens. Things evolve. That's right. The word I'm looking for. Things evolve through time, and as people move through history and move from place to place, things evolve. And that's how they stay alive. They stay alive by evolving.
But also it's like such a global community now. We're living in such a small world in a sense that trying to stop the knowledge from spreading, it's
absolutely
it just doesn't.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Ravelry,
right?
For an example, all of those fabulous patterns. I mean, I go down the rabbit hole on Ravelry, and I keep buying patterns, and they're all sitting there, and I'm thinking, I have no idea when I'm going to have time. Well, like that young man that was on the most recent interview that you did from Taiwan.
Rastus.
I went straight onto Ravelry and immediately started following him on Instagram, and I just love. I mean, that's what I mean. Right. It's a completely different. It's contemporary. The lines are so simple yet so beautiful. I mean, and this is what knitting. This is what you need to. And this is also something that Ethnomregia is trying to do. Also, you learn the skills. You learn how to, and this is something I love about our David as well. You learn the skills and you apply them to new contemporary designs.
Right.
And that was the theme of every year they do an exhibition at a competition called 100 Women, 100 Miniatures. So they invite, there are, the 5 most traditional, most important crafting skills in Serbia. And they invite submissions, and they choose 100. And they come in miniature form, like all of these pieces come in miniature form. And, there's embroidery, weaving, knitting, gold thread embroidery, and a filigree lace, I think, is the fifth category. And then they are judged and everything. And the theme this year was innovation. So taking the traditional skills and using them in an innovative way. It was very, very cool. Really, really was. And but that's like that's what you go into, that's what you see on Ravelry. You see so many traditional styles of pattern from all over the world. So of course you have access to, you know, you have access to designers from all over the world. So
I
we
love
can
that.
all,
And I just like really appreciate what you've been doing and how you help spread the word there and how you're continuing with your work while you're outside.
that's what I mean, I my plan is to continue, I hope in some way, certainly to go back to Serbia, continue certainly to visit the associations there, and there are many that I haven't gotten to yet. So I will go back and travel around with Violetta and with my weaving teacher, with Maria, and hopefully as well with David, and also go back and see. I know he's got big ideas for developing a traditional cultural and historic kind of center near where he lives. So I'm definitely not done with I hope with my work in Serbia, and certainly with visiting Serbia. So maybe you'll get there too.
I hope so. This is definitely
Maybe that's where you and I will finally meet.
I hope it's either that or I'm coming to Dublin in June. So that's
Oh, you are?
yeah, woolen. I was supposed to be there 2 years ago, but then COVID happened. So if they running woolen this year, I mean 2000, yeah.
Oh, they are? Oh, well, okay, well, then that's a date then. That is
Definitely.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much, and I loved having you on my channel. I think.
Oh, it's been absolutely my pleasure. We could probably talk for hours about the same thing, but it has absolutely been my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, hold on.